Good evening, everyone. I want to thank everyone for making their way to my project. My project is for my Sociology of Law Enforcement course. To introduce myself, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Christopher Allen. I would like to take just a moment of your time to discuss policing and technology as it relates to training and some of its future implications. The title of my project is Training the Police Officers of Tomorrow. A few of the learning objectives and ideas I'd like to discuss with you this afternoon include war and body cams and emerging enforcement technology, training officers to think and use that technology, and the implications technology has for the future of training. A few definitions I would like to establish before delving into each subpart include the U.S. Justice Department's definition of procedural justice. The key takeaways from this definition are fairness and following a standard process that applies to every citizen equally. And so why is this important, this definition? It's important because it's the foundation of constitutional policing. It should be a guiding idea behind why a police officer puts that badge on his chest and he straps his duty belt on and he goes to work. And so when we talk about police training, it is also important to recognize and talk about the idea of adult learning. Adults learn differently than children do and teenagers. Adults rely upon past experience and previously known knowledge. So police training does take this into account because it's an entirely different process. Okay. The first discussion point I'd like to talk to you today is about war and body cams and the emergent technologies. So, why body cams? Body cams stemmed out of the need for police accountability. There have been a lot of use of force cases that citizens have questioned police judgment, and so out of that discussion, body cams have become the standard. And this is important for police officers, both new and experienced, to have training on to know, is because according to Highland, 47% of all police departments in the U.S. have already implemented and are using this technology. So this technology is not going anywhere. And if you're going to be a successful police officer, it is imperative that you know how to use the technology, you understand its implications, you understand the theory, and you understand how to, I would say, use it in a way that respects citizens and keeps their dignity intact and follows that theme of constitutional policing. One of the considerations for police officers that are using this technology is that police officers need to be more aware of their actions. And so what's kind of interesting and counter to that idea that body cams do this is actually something that Lamming brought up and highlights, is that worn body cams do not reduce police force, use of force, or behavior broadly. They do reduce police complaints, and they did, according to his study, 88%. So once the body cams were deployed, the complaints were cleared 88% of the time. It's obviously an issue with false complaints or exaggerated complaints. Body cams don't just indict criminals, they also can protect officers as well. And so, again, this is very important for young and experienced officers to know the technology, and it should be repetitively trained. The importance of the body cam use to protect yourself, the department, and in some ways to mind your manners with citizens. So, other considerations for the use of technology, and again, training the officers to think and to utilize this technology in the best way possible. So one of the things that has been born out of technology has been an abundance of inculpatory evidence. Attorneys, prosecutors, there's so much evidence that's generated by just a one police stop or a police encounter. And so an officer needs to know the limitations of a technology. Maybe he needs to know how well his camera works, what the distance is, how well his microphone is. There's a lot of those things, and of course, what does this technology do? How does it affect people's behavior? Well, when a police officer mentions to a citizen that they're being recorded, there is evidence that suggests that citizens they do act a little better. Now, of course, on that note of citizen behavior, it's important to recognize that citizens who are treated with respect and dignity do more often respond to police demands or commands, and also not counter, but parallel to this, it was also found in another study that police officers tend to be more rude to black motorists. Now, I kind of take that study with a grain of salt. There are a lot of cultural issues. There's a lot of challenges between different communities, and so what's rude to one is different to another. So that judgment is largely subjective, but I do think it does show you that body cams, if body cams are to be used for changing police behavior, then are they effective? Well, that's a question, but at least as it relates to training, it's really important that officers understand this technology, because this technology has the great potential to build on police legitimacy, right? It can clear police officers of charges of misconduct, or it can indict them, or it can indict criminals, and it can show that the actions that the police took were justified. And other emerging technologies that have kind of been born out of this need from law enforcement, because just the lack of manpower and just the stress on the resources in a lot of areas, include facial recognition software. Now, there's actually software that's being developed that actually utilizes the body cam on the officer itself. Biometrics, DNA, database access, and again, going back to that facial recognition software, that body cams are getting sophisticated enough to recognize a suspect and then connecting the officer to a database immediately. And so the use of that technology has some concerns, has some constitutional issues, privacy. There's a lot of things that are kind of being discussed with this technology because it is so new. And so, one of the concerns that's been brought up by some researchers has been the continued dehumanization and the loss of the human element within policing. And so as technology continues to get better and better, there's a picture of RoboCop and a kind of a police bot in the front of my presentation, and that the placement was purposeful. As stress on police officers gets more and more, as people are questioning human judgment and are questioning police legitimacy in a lot of ways, I think society will continue to turn to a dehumanized element, to a computer, to an AI, to start making decisions. And again, police officers, if they want to slow that trend, need to have the training, need to know that, while this technology exists, that, they need to put themselves in a place that they're human. They need to present themselves to citizens that they care and that they have genuine concern for their fellow man. And so, when we talk about these technologies, what obviously comes up is pre-crime, because, as this technology with big data is incorporated with big data, we get a lot of not problems, but just concerns that stem out of predictive policing and analysis. And so there are a lot of constitutional issues that, again, get brought up in this whole thing. And theme of constitutional policing, police need to know what citizens' rights are, and need to know that there are consequences for breaking those rights and violating those rights. And, police should be respecting those rights. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, but training needs to emphasize and should incorporate the respect for citizens' rights. And of course, procedural justice with technology is paramount. I mean, you need police officers training should be reflecting that standard process that treats all citizens the same. So, as more and more departments are implementing the technology, there's a need for guidance that there's a set established standard among the 18,000 police departments, or law enforcement agencies that make up the country. And that's definitely a challenge, and something that a centralized training forum could definitely help solve. And so, kind of continue on the discussion of technology, law enforcement agencies definitely use social media, both public and private. Police departments use Twitter, Facebook, and sometimes YouTube, but primarily Twitter and Facebook, to pass key information to citizens, offer warnings, tips, or even just to check in with the community and see what's going on, if there's any emergent issues. And so it's really important that law enforcement officers get training on proper use of these things. There's been a lot of misconduct that has stemmed from social media use. There's been inappropriate comments. There's been all sorts of things, and training needs to reflect that reality. Now, some departments have made a move towards towards that. A lot of departments do have social media policy use, but they really don't have any training on it. They really don't have in-depth training on acceptable use and giving examples and of course, like I said, and presenting the information to the officer to help them understand the optics and the perceptions of the situation. And of course, going back to the theme of the dehumanization of police and kind of the loss of the human element, Twitter and Facebook definitely put the police at a distance. Before, in the past, before telephone did this as well, but people would have to go up to a police officer and talk to them. This lack of social interaction really is affecting both the officer and the citizen. And when people aren't having direct human contact, that affects how police and how citizens communicate with each other. And that's ultimately going to affect the idea of constitutional policing, alter some of those ideas. And so, and of course, at the end of it, officers should be trained and should know what the media and how social media perceives things. That things are snippets. They're 6-second videos. They need to understand the implications and the optics of their behavior, that while it might be acceptable under the law, but the way that it's perceived in the community is not acceptable. And that's a really hard thing to do. I'm not sure that any real training can completely help an officer, but certainly there could be again, examples given of other officers that have done well and those that have not done well with the use of social media or being the subject of conversation on social media. And so, in summary, we went over worn body cams, emergent enforcement technology, how to train officers to think and use that technology, and the implications technology has on the future of training and some of the things that are going to evolve over time. So I would like to thank you all for making your way to my project again. Thank you for paying attention best you can, and I hope you all have a good night.